Okay, so once I have my drawing, my orthographic drawing all figured out, and I've got everything labeled and straightened out, I've got my front view and my side view, it's time to start measuring and start understanding what some of these shapes are. So I'm going to start, just for example, with my bottom piece. Might as well start with number 1. So again, remember, I'm going to measure from the top. So I'm going to line my ruler up here, and I'm used to using inches, so that's what I prefer using, although I also am happy using centimeters. So I'll quickly show you both. And I'll start by making a template for a couple pieces, and then I'll show you how to mark these on the foam core and actually cut them out. Okay, so my first piece is 6 inches across. And actually, I'm already making a mistake. I need to remember to measure only my blue line, so blue line to blue line, and that is 5 inches. Now, there's only so much accuracy we need to worry about with this project, so don't worry about if it's 4 and 31/32. Just round up, and 5 inches is a nice easy measurement to remember. Okay, so I'm going to come over to my Bristol here, and this is my blue or X dimension, and I'm just going to start, actually give myself a little space, and I'm going to mark 5 inches. And I'm actually going to mark the halfway point of that as well. So half of 5 is 2.5. And this is where, if you're more comfortable or it's faster for you to divide centimeters in half because they're decimal points instead of fractions, that's totally fine. So there's my X direction. I'll just mark X over here. So remember, X or blue. Come back to my drawing. And now I'm going to measure my red or Y dimension. And notice that is from here to here. Now that particular inch has 64ths on it, which is kind of visually annoying, but it's 3 inches, and then it's actually about 3/16. So I'll do 3 and 3/16. So there's lots of little tiny ticks on there. You just have to learn how to overlook all the really, really small marks and just use the ones that you need. So I'm just going to go to 3 and 1, 2, 3/16. Again, come back over to my piece of paper here, and I'm going to mark this on either side. So now I've got to figure out what is half of 3 and 3/16. I could just mark this over here and do it this way, or I could divide my 3 and 3/16 in half. So when you divide a fraction in half, you just multiply its denominator by 2. So in that case, half of 3 is 1.5. Half of 3/16 is 3/32. So I do 1.5 plus 3/32. 1, 2, 3. So again, I'm not super concerned about getting as accurate as 30 seconds, but just approximately, that's where I want to be. So I can measure my 3 and 3/16 and start at 0 there, and my halfway point is right there. Now I'm going to do that over here as well. What I'm going to start by doing is making a rectangle, which represents the entire space or entire dimension that my piece will take up. Now, I haven't tried to draw this with a square or anything. I'm not going to worry about that. As long as it's relatively rectangular, that's fine. Okay, so this direction is my Y direction. So anything going along this direction will be in the Y direction. Anything going this direction will be the X direction. So that, again, is just going back to my drawing. Red dimensions are Y, blue dimensions are X, the way I've marked it. However you want to mark it is fine. So the bottom of this piece, if I think about a donut again, the bottom, if I were to cut a flat edge off of a donut so it could stand upright, it's going to be kind of elliptical, right? So now that I have my dimensions here, and I'll just draw couple guidelines, I'm going to have to kind of draw an ellipse. Now, drawing an ellipse freehand isn't always super easy, but if you've got a rectangle around the space, you can draw yourself some guidelines, and that will help you sort of visualize the space and help you draw a more even curve. So now I have to start here, and I'm going to try to draw an ellipse. And this curve, the type of ellipse that you end up drawing, will end up determining the character of your design, what type of curve it has. And so this is where you are inventing this shape. And so depending on what type of curve you end up making, it'll make your piece look one way or another. Now, when you're drawing an ellipse, you don't want to make what I sometimes call a lemon. So if I only have guidelines at my 4 quadrants of my rectangle, sometimes the tendency is to flatten out this curve too much, and you end up with these sort of points at those corners, right? So if I drew my ellipse sort of like this, it ends up looking kind of like a lemon, right? And I probably don't want that. So I'm going to, what I like to say is inflate my curve a little bit, blow it up, add some air to it. So I'm just going to bring that out a little bit more. Again, this is freehanding, so it's sometimes tricky to get it totally the same all the way around. I'm going to erase my lemon curve here. Now notice though that this side, I really have that much more rounded. This side is a little bit pointier. So again, I have to decide, what do I like? What do I want my piece to look like? It's really up to me, up to you, the designer, to decide what the actual shape should be. And start to understand how those choices are going to change the character of my piece visually. So this is my first slice. Now I kind of like this a little bit more, so I'm going to go back and refine this side in. And again, the guidelines help me sort of see this space is a bit bigger than this space. So I could even measure if I wanted to be really accurate. So that's about 2¼ centimeters in. So 2¼ centimeters, that would tell me exactly where I want my curve to hit that diagonal line. Now, there are other tools that you can use to help you draw curves. I have some French curves over here. Maybe you have a set of these. And there are different sizes of French curve in proportions. And so sometimes what you can do is find some part of this that you like, which will help you draw it. Rarely, though, I find with a French curve is there one exact part that you can just trace the entire curve. Sometimes I have to use a little of this and then kind of shift it over and use it a little bit more until I'm happy with it. And then you have to try to mimic that as a mirror. So, but that can definitely help you if you have a set of French curves. Now, the other thing is, do you want your piece to be symmetrical, or do you want it to be a slightly different curve on the back side than on the front side? You can also play around with that. It doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical, as long as one piece to the next kind of flows and feels like the whole thing is kind of cohesive as a design. So I've got this pretty close. The other tool or method that you might like to do is you could cut out, like if I really like this particular curve the best, I could always cut this out and then flip it over, trace it, flip it, trace it, flip it, trace it. And that would be one way to make a perfectly symmetrical curve all the way around. So here's my first piece. I'll just label this 1, or maybe I should write right in the middle so that when we get to cutting this out, I've got my label on it. There's my first piece. So that's pretty straightforward, the first one, because it's just an ellipse at the base, okay? It's going to get a little bit trickier when I get up to just below and just above my donut hole, okay? That's where it gets a little bit more complicated. So I'm going to skip ahead and I'm going to demonstrate number 5. I'll just circle that one so I remember which one I'm doing. This one I will do with centimeters just to demonstrate centimeters. Okay, so again, I'm going to measure the top part of my piece, and I'm doing the blue to the blue line to start with. That is 17 3/4 centimeters. So I'm just going to go, well, it's actually 17.8. Just round it up to 17.8. So I'm going to bring my 17.8 over here and give myself plenty of space again to work. 17.8. Now again, I'm going to divide that in half. So half of 17 is going to be 8.5, and half of 0.8 is 0.4. So I'm going to have 8.5 plus 0.4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's going to be 8.9. It's my halfway point. All right, now I'm going to come over to my red side, and again I'm doing 5 so I don't get confused visually. I can remember which is which. And that one is going to be 10.5 centimeters. Okay, so that again, so here's my X direction. I'm going to rotate my paper, and my 10.5 goes perpendicular to my 17.8. So half of 10.5, half of 10 is 5, half of a half is a quarter. So it's going to be 5 1/4. So 5 1/4 with centimeters is going to be 5.25 millimeters. Sorry, 5.25 centimeters. The 0.25 is going to be 2.5 millimeters, which is kind of hard. You just sort of have to go halfway between a half and 0 in this case. It's, you know, again, only so much accuracy is needed with this particular project. Okay, so there's that. I'll mark this on either end as well. And then I'll just go ahead and connect my marks to make my overall rectangle. Okay, so again, this is going to be my Y direction here, and this is my X direction, so Y and X. Now, I've got this other measurement over here, which I haven't done yet. So notice that I've got this curve which represents the cutaway view of my donut from the side. So if I were to take that donut and slice it down the middle and turn it to look at the side of it, that's what these other curves are. Okay, and so I've got this extra measurement that I have to do. So if I come back over to my 5th line here, I've got the distance from the outside of my curve to this inner curve. And this one is about 2.5 centimeters on one side, and on the other side it's just about the same. It's really close, so we'll just say that it's symmetrical, and that's fine. We'll just go with a theoretical symmetrical donut. Now again, that's in my Y direction along my red, between my red lines, so that's going to go along my Y direction over here, and that's because it's the middle of my donut that's cut out. That's going to go right in the middle of my piece. So I'm going to measure 2.5 centimeters in this direction, and 2.5 centimeters in this direction. 1, 2.5. Okay, so what the heck does that mean? So now I've got my outside curve of my ellipse, which is going to, I want it to flow around the outside of my piece from the bottom, and I'm skipping from 1 all the way to 5. So I want a similar curve on the outside that I had from the beginning. So what I could do is cut out my first template and sort of use that as a guide to trace onto my second template and my third template and just sort of expand on it a little bit each time. But in this case, I'm just going to have to redraw my ellipse, my outer part of my ellipse. But I'm going to fudge it out a little bit towards the ends in this case, because remember, this is going to start to split off into 2 ellipses around my donut hole. So I'm going to just push the curve out slightly so that I have room for that donut hole to start opening up. And so then this is going to actually pinch in on the inside. So it's going to look something like this. Again, I'm going to play around with that curve and refine it until it fits what I want my piece to look like. So it's going to be some kind of a curvature like that. Notice that on one side, this is a little bit more gentle of a curve. This side I've just drawn it as it's a little bit too sharp. So again, I'm just going to keep refining that until it's a little bit more rounded. So each of these pieces is going to slowly get a little bit more pinched in, and that starts, turn this facing you guys, if I look at my Y direction here, that starts with number 3 really, where I have this space right here, the distance between the outside of the curve and where it starts to curve in for my donut hole. So here's from here to here, and then over on this side it's there. And then number 4 you can see has a little bit more space because that curves in more. And then number 5 that we just did comes all the way into here. And then number 6 is the first one that they don't touch. So it's going to be 2 separate pieces. So it's number 6, we're going to measure from there to there, and then on this side from there to there for my X direction, and my Y direction is just going to be separated. So it's going to be 2 separate ellipses. So number 5 over here again is the last one that's still connected, and so I can imagine the inside of this curve for my next piece for number 6 is going to come all the way across like this, and it's going to be 2 separate ellipses next to each other. And so that's what we're trying to represent with this pinch, is where it starts to separate apart.